Welcome to this episode of the Flying Dutchman podcast. And today we're going to look at the sole surviving Nakajima KAI-84 Hayate, or referred to as Frank. We're going to find out how this aircraft, captured in the Pacific, put on an aircraft carrier back to the United States, was purchased by Edward T. Maloney, who founded the Chino Air Museum. This is after it was returned, put in the markings of the 52nd Sentai, used in this movie with Steve McQueen, Frank Sinatra, and here it is put back in the field in Ontario, and then ended up at the Kamikaze Museum in Japan. It's a very interesting story, and believe it or not, this aircraft was actually returned to flying status briefly in the United States before being sold to a rich individual in Japan, where it performed at several air shows before being grounded for lack of ability to come up with spare parts. So sit back, relax. I hope you enjoyed this as much as I did researching it. It's a fascinating story, and when you understand it's the last surviving, we're very spoiled in the West here. The amount of Mustangs, Corsairs, Mitchells, 2 Lancaster bombers, multiple Spitfires, and unfortunately the same can't be said for aircraft the Imperial Japanese Army and Navy. So let's learn about this. It's going to be a great story, and I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did create it. Well, as we were continuing to defeat the Japanese and doing island hopping, we were capturing equipment and aircraft used by the Japanese, and that included the KAI-84 that we see here. They brought it to the United States, the one that is now in Japan. It had been built in late 1944 at the Nakajima Aircraft Factory. It was assigned to the 11th Hiko Sentai Flying Regiment, and it flew against American aircraft, but because of our superiority, the Japanese ended up having to evacuate and leave aircraft behind, and that included this KAI-84. It was it did have some damage to it, and it was recaptured in January of 1945 by the Americans. And upon inspection, it was found that it could be made flyable. So what they did is they were able to get 2 of them. And it was decided that the captured aircraft could be made airworthy and flight tested. They flight tested locally at Clark Airfield in the Philippines. And they also decided to send them to the United States. And they repainted them. They gave them a neutral red-white stripe pattern. So they wanted it to look like pre-World War II bare metal with the red and white on the rudder. And they wanted to evaluate it against aircraft like the Hellcat, Thunderbolt, Mustang. And these tests gave the American pilots of the KAI-44's tactics. And they learned that this was an aircraft that, certainly in the right hands, in a higher octane fuel, would definitely be something to contend with. And it already was. In fact, it caught the Americans a little by surprise, because it wasn't an Oscar. It was a Frank, and it was to be dealt with. So the aircraft were brought on the USS Long Island, and that's where you see this here. And it ended up eventually, it was among about a dozen Allied and Axis aircraft selected to be preserved for a future aviation museum. And they put it in storage at the former Douglas C-54 assembly plant, which was located at what is now the Chicago O'Hare International Airport. The vast majority of the aircraft at Park Ridge, is what it was called, would eventually be transferred to the newly created Air Force Museum and the Smithsonian Institution National Air Museum. However, the Korean War broke out, the Smithsonian was evicted, and by 1952, the Air Force was forced to move its collection to Silver Hill Storage in Maryland. And unfortunately, some of the Japanese aircraft were declared to be in excess of the collection, and a lot of the aircraft were scrapped. Upon hearing about this, there was a gentleman out in California, Edward T. Maloney. He wanted to create a museum in Southern California, and at that time he was in Ontario. So he reached out and inquired to see if any Japanese aircraft declared to be excess could be sold and not scrapped. He was told he could pick up one of two airplanes, the Frank or a twin-engine Tonyo, which was nicknamed Nick. He chose the Frank, and in 1952, it arrived in Claremont, where Maloney placed it in storage alongside a growing collection of surplus World War II planes. And he hoped that it would be a centerpiece of a new museum where these aircraft would be in airworthy condition. And as we know, the Chino Air Museum in Southern California is one of the best with flyable museum aircraft. So when Maloney was trying to set up its museum, the first of its kind west of the Mississippi, he attracted the attention of movie producers from MGM, who were making a film adaptation of the novel Never So Few. And it was about guerrilla warfare against the Japanese and included an attack on a Japanese airfield. The movie starred Frank Sinatra, Steve McQueen, and he did. He agreed. They put it in semi-flyable condition where it could taxi under its own power. They repainted it in the markings of the 52nd Sentai, and its Nakajima Homer radial engine was fired up and was used for taxiing in front of the cameras in a short scene alongside the painted Zero. So after the movie was made and the aircraft was returned, it was decided to make this aircraft, the KAI-84, airworthy. So there's a lot of excitement, and it had only been 18 years since the end of World War II, and there were a lot of pilots and engineers in that area that served during the war, and this would be the first time a Japanese aircraft had been restored by private hands to flight status. So they registered the aircraft with the FAA as November 3385 Golf. They were pretty quick with the work that they did, and the repairs were made, including the replacement of sheet metal patches over bullet holes. Was finished in May, and on June 25th, 1963, they took the KAI-84 for its first flight test. And it actually participated in several air shows at the Orange County Airport, which is now John Wayne Airport in Santa Ana. The last KAI-84, which was also the last Japanese aircraft of World War II, in airworthy condition, now made its home at Ontario Airport. And it did continue to fly in local air shows. And however, like many expensive projects, especially standalone aircraft and museums, the Air Museum in Ontario did not have the infinite financial resources, especially because museums started moving its static collection to Bueno Park in 1970, and then they'd eventually move the entire collection to Chino Airport in 1973. Ed Maloney had to sell off or traded some of his airplanes for new examples for his collection and get the proceeds so he could have a flying collection and maintain a museum. So in 1973, Maloney sold the KAI-84 to museum pilot Don Likens. But unfortunately, Likens could not afford to maintain the aircraft, but there was a buyer who was interested in purchasing the aircraft. And that buyer lived in Japan and brought it back to Japan. And so in 1973, Likens sold the KAI-84 to Marinho Gokon, president of the Japanese Owners Pilots Association, and himself a World War II veteran pilot. He flew the aircraft at the 1973 Japan International Aerospace Show, held at the Japanese Air Self-Defense Force in Yoroma Air Base, and this marked the first time that a World War II Japanese fighter had flown in Japanese skies since 1945. In addition to Gokon flying the aircraft, Don Likens and Ed Maloney came to Japan, with Likens flying the K-45 at Yoroma. While Maloney watched during that air show, even as they prepared to leave, they met with the president of Mitsubishi Aircraft, who, upon learning that the museum in California had an A6M0, asked Likens and Maloney if they could restore it to flying condition, and that prompted the restoration of 061-120, which remains airworthy to this day. Now, unfortunately for the Kai-84, that was the last public flight. As you would imagine, the expense of maintaining a one-of-a-kind fighter aircraft had not been in production for over 30 years at that point. It was just challenging in Japan as it was in America. During the 1970s, the aircraft was displayed at the factory of the company that succeeded Nakajima, which is Fuji Heavy Industries, which later became Subaru. This is where it was exposed to the elements, and then following the death of Miranio Gokan, the Kai-84 was then transported to the museum near Kyoto, where it was displayed alongside a Japanese A6M-70 Model 62, which is now displayed in the Maritime Museum in Curie, also known as the Yamamoto Museum. In 1991, the privately operated museum near Kyoto closed, and the aircraft was placed into storage for 4 years. In 1995, the final twists in the Kai-84's long journey unfolded. The aircraft was made a centerpiece of the Chiran Peace Museum for Kamikaze Pilots in Kagoshima. The home island of Kaishu, Chiran, has been the home of an airfield in which many young pilots who joined the special attack units, or as we know as kamikazes, had departed on their final fateful sorties during the Battle of Okinawa. Since the museum was constructed in 1985, it houses artifacts commemorating the kamikaze pilots, including many of their poignant letters written to their friends and families, that sometimes included hair clippings and fingernails, just prior to their missions. While the Nakajima Kai-84 Frank was not used for kamikaze missions, it was still one of the Imperial Japanese Army Air Service's most capable fighters even in 1945. The Kai-84 squadrons did operate from the home island, and they would escort the kamikaze pilots to prevent American fighters from shooting them down before reaching the American task force on their one-way mission. Since its arrival at the Chiran Peace Museum, this world's last surviving Nakajima Kai-84, having flown on both sides of the Pacific, now rests in a place of honor, with its exterior having been restored and the aircraft placed completely indoors. Though some people might lament the fact that the aircraft no longer flies, the fact that it remains in existence today is a testament to the foresight of both American and Japanese enthusiasts. From Ed Maloney to Morano Gokan, in preserving this Kai-84 for future generations. And it is indeed fitting that this aircraft now rests in the land of its birth, Japan. Thank you once again for joining myself on the Flying Dutchman podcast. And if you know of a former or current aircrew member that would like to be interviewed on the show, or if you have any ideas that you would like to see me profile, contact myself at dutch@flyingdutchmanpodcast.com. And again, thank you, and we'll see you.